Israel this morning completed what it called retaliatory precision strikes on Iran after a nearly 4-hour operation of targeted strikes on military targets across Iran. The Israeli military said it had concluded the mission it saw as a huge success. The IDF said that the operation focused strictly on military targets, steering clear of nuclear and oil facilities to prevent wider conflict escalation. Now, a report says over 100 aircraft were used in this massive assault, including F-35 Adir fighters, covering nearly 2,000 kilometers. An operation of this scope likely began with initial waves attacking radar and air defense systems, clearing the path for subsequent strikes on military bases. Earlier, coordinated strike in Syria neutralized similar threats, preventing Iran from building situational awareness of Israel's plans. The strikes reportedly happened in several phases. In the first, at least 6 loud explosions were heard on the outskirts of the Iranian capital Tehran early in the hours of the morning. Explosions were also heard in the nearby city of Barrage. Shortly after, a second wave of airstrikes was reported. Blasts were heard in the city of Shiraz. Iran's military has confirmed that the strikes targeted military bases in Ilam, Khuzestan, and Tehran provinces and caused limited damage. Explosions were also reported in Syrian capital of Damascus. Media reports said Syrian air defenses intercepted missiles launched by Israel from the direction of the Israeli-occupied Syrian Golan Heights and the Lebanese territories. Sources in Iran say the country is prepared to give a proportional reaction to Israeli aggression. But both the US and Israel have warned that Iran should not retaliate. The Israeli military has said that the strikes have given it more freedom to operate in skies over Iran. The IDF added that it has struck Iran's missile manufacturing facilities and surface-to-air missile arrays. No fire or explosions have been reported at a main oil refinery near the capital. Israel's strikes were limited to military targets and did not include nuclear or oil facilities. Earlier, Israeli military spokesperson Daniel Hagari released a video statement confirming the strikes on Iran. He said Israel's defensive and offensive capabilities are fully mobilized. Hagari added that like every other sovereign country in the world, Israel has the right and the duty to respond. Washington also called the targeted strikes in Iran an exercise in self-defense. National Security Council spokesperson Sean Savet said that the attack was a response to Iran's ballistic missile attack against Israel on October 1st. In fact, the White House was notified in advance before Israel launched the attack. However, the US has stressed that it was not involved in the Israeli strikes. Chris Doyle is a director and spokesperson of Council for Arab-British Understanding. He is now joining us live from London. Mr. Doyle, thank you very much for making time for us and welcome. What is going to happen next now that we know that Israel has told Iran not to retaliate, but there are so many critics who are saying that if Iran decides to retaliate for the strikes that Israel did, then this escalation is going to be worse and uncontrollable?
We have many, many questions right now and very few answers. We only can rely on partial information as to the extent of the Israeli strikes, and in many ways that will determine how Iran responds to them. How many Iranians or others were killed in the strikes, for example, the extent of the damage, and to what way that Iran will perceive this as a violation of its sovereignty that it needs to do something about. But the context, of course, is one in which we have now, without question, a regional war in the Middle East. These are strikes that Israel conducted both on Syria and on Iran that have followed, of course, Iranian strikes on Israel twice this year in April and most recently, of course, on the 1st of October. So we're into a situation of missile ping-pong at one level, but also engagement between Israel and Iranian allies such as Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza, even the Houthis in Yemen, as well as a considerable number of strikes in Syria itself. So the situation is precarious. it's not clear where any de-escalation, let alone a ceasefire, is going to come from, because the United States doesn't seem to be taking the lead in getting this at all. We have seen various envoys from the United States, including Secretary of State Antony Blinken, come to the region, but leave empty-handed. And if anything, many people in the region believe that the United States is comfortable, the Biden administration, with what has happened in recent weeks, that they have green-lighted the Israeli invasion of Lebanon and are going to be pretty comfortable with these Israeli strikes on Iranian military targets.
Mr. Doyle, let's talk about that ceasefire, because now that you brought it up, this region is seemingly volatile. It's getting worse by the day. There are some countries in this region which are stable. There are those critics who would say, why are these countries not engaging Israel with the other countries like Lebanon or Syria or Iran in this matter to try and resolve their issues? Why do they have to rely on the United States? Why do they have to rely on the West? Who can broker a peace deal within the region?
Well, there are many different facets to answering that question. I think, first of all, that it is the United States has the key influence on Israel. And Israel is the dominant actor in this, in that it is a military superpower in terms of the region, an economic powerhouse, and one with a lot of diplomatic clout. So without the United States, it's very difficult to influence Israel. Then, of course, you have an array of different Middle East actors, some with differing views. And I think what one doesn't see is them working together to try to find that sort of path towards de-escalation. They have differing agendas. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, for example, have today condemned the Israeli strikes on Iran. Now, that is somewhat of a surprise if you wanted to go back 4 or 5 years ago, because both those countries might have been expected to be somewhat more silent about this because they had a more anti-Iranian posture. But you'll remember, of course, that Iran and Saudi Arabia came to understandings last year brokered by China. And I think it shows the nervousness of particularly the Gulf Arab states about the implications of a broader regional war, that Iran, for example, might decide to respond against their interests. Now, this was a particular threat if Israeli strikes had hit Iran's oil and gas infrastructure. It seems that the United States did have an influence in ensuring that the strikes were on military targets alone, and we believe that it wasn't against nuclear sites. But certainly, I think there is a failure of leadership. That failure of leadership is not just amongst the actors who are engaging in this conflict, is at the international community level, the key major powers, and as you suggest in your question, amongst regional leaders.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much. I've been talking to Mr. Chris Doyle, who's the director and spokesperson for Council for Arab-British Understanding. Mr. Doyle, as always, thank you for your time. For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.